Everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. We are grateful to all of you for your level of interest on this important matter. I also want to acknowledge and thank my colleague, Councilmember Ed Spriggs, for agreeing to serve together on the City of Imperial Beach's Law Enforcement Review Ad Hoc Committee. I believe that as the two council members of color on the council, myself as the first Latinx woman to be elected to council, and Councilmember Spriggs as the first African-American to be elected to council in Imperial Beach, we're grateful to see that our city's leadership mirrors the rich and diverse makeup of our community. So the Ad Hoc Committee is comprised of Councilmember Spriggs and me. We want to provide ample opportunity to provide feedback, comments, ideas, and concerns as they relate to public safety in Imperial Beach and our contract with the Sheriff Department, its fiscal impact on our community's resources, and we also want to make sure that we have a thorough review of our sheriff's use of force policies and practices. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the unprecedented times our society is living through. We are facing an upheaval of civil unrest and calls for justice unlike anything we have ever witnessed before. So I want to make sure that we acknowledge that. This ad hoc is the result of concerns raised by many members within our community. It is why every single member of this council signed a statement in solidarity with Black Lives. It is why we also unanimously approved a proclamation supporting Black lives and condemning racism. With that being said, what is true nationally is not necessarily what is happening in Imperial Beach. So I also want to acknowledge Lieutenant Marcus and our IB deputies. Imperial Beach, as you know, is the second safest city in the entire county. And I want to acknowledge and thank Lieutenant Marcus for always keeping a line of communication and keeping our community safe. So our goal here today and through the next steps of this process is straightforward. We want to determine what is best for IB. What works elsewhere may not necessarily be a good fit here and vice versa. So that is why our goals are to listen to your views, your concerns and ideas so that we can develop recommendations to bring forward prior to the upcoming renegotiation with our sheriff. We also want to take a deep dive and thoroughly analyze the cost of our sheriff's department's contract and the impact on our city's budget. We also want to make sure that we review, analyze, and reassess the use of force policies and practices of our deputies so that together we can help shape the future of public safety in IB. Not San Diego, not Chula Vista, but what is the best fit of Imperial Beach. Finally, I want to acknowledge and remind everyone that we all experience life circumstances differently. So what is true for some may not necessarily be the same experiences for others. So my hope is that as we go through this journey together, we do so respectfully and with an open mind, because one thing is true is that we all want the same thing. We want to have a thriving life in Imperial Beach. We want our community to continue to thrive, and we want our quality of life to continue to improve. So again, thank you so much for being here on a Saturday, an early morning on a Saturday. I very much look forward to working with all of you over the next coming weeks. And with that, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Spriggs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre. That was very well stated, and I'm totally in sync with all of your comments. I'd like to also say good morning and welcome to everyone who's attending here, and to thank you for taking your time on a Saturday morning to work with this City Council committee as we put together recommendations over the next several weeks to present to the City Council at our second meeting in September. I believe that is our time frame. We have a 90-day time frame that started several weeks ago. So my name is Ed Spriggs. I am serving my third term on the Imperial Beach City Council. My previous career included law and economic development. I'm a lawyer licensed to practice in the District of Columbia, but not California, and I've not put myself out as a lawyer in California, but I have practiced a number of years in private practice in Washington and in government service. I also have served as a senior university administrator and 22 years in the U.S. Foreign Service abroad. As an African American, male, and council member, and I believe I'm still the only Black male elected official in San Diego County over the last 10 years. I bring a dual perspective to this committee and its process that I wanted to share a little bit with you, because I think it kind of sets some of the context that Mayor Pro Tem McGarry was talking about in terms of our various experiences and what we bring forward to this work that we're all doing together. On one hand, I've experienced racism, both overt and barely noticeable slights and put downs. Sometimes these are called microaggressions. Throughout my life, really, starting with unnecessary police stops as a child walking my dogs in my own neighborhood on my own street in Logan Heights. My major concern these days, following the events that are in the news that Mayor Pro Tem referred to, my major concern are acts based on something called implicit bias, where the person in power may or may not be aware they are acting differently towards someone because they are Black or brown. For example, let's all think about the power of a job interviewer or a landlord taking rental applications and what the consequences of implicit bias can be in those situations. Think about how the racial disparities in all aspects of our lives, as is being talked about in the news more these days, actually happen. Now, let's go from a landlord or a job interviewer and think about the impact of implicit bias if the person in power is a cop with a gun and arresting authority. I think you get my point. On the other hand, I've been elected 3 times to the City Council, in part because I support public safety strongly as one of the highest priorities in this community. I've been a supporter of our sheriff's presence here and have been endorsed by the Deputy Sheriff's Association during each of my 3 election campaigns. I believe the sheriff provides a more professional and well-trained service than we could provide if we created our own small-town police department. That doesn't mean improvements can't be made. It's just letting you know how I feel about our sheriff's services. One final thing about me, in the spirit of full disclosure. Many of you may know that I'm also a close follower of city budget and financial matters. And for several years, I've been increasingly concerned about the total cost and annual increases of our contract with the sheriff. That contract is our largest city expense item, and its cost is growing 3 times faster than our revenue. The basics of our city's financial condition really need to be understood by all of us on this committee if we as a committee are going to be able to make useful recommendations to the City Council. So this morning's meeting, the first of 5 in total, will focus on sheriff contract costs and staffing in the context of our city budget, so we can all start off on the same page. We always have to know what our constraints are, and one of our biggest constraints here is financial. Another meeting will focus on sheriff practices and IB, particularly on use of force. Another meeting will address the fit between what the community needs and the use of armed deputies and explore feasible alternatives. Then we will devote 2 meetings to reviewing and finalizing our report to the City Council. So with that introduction, I'm happy to turn over the running of the couple issues that we've talked about for this meeting to Andy Hall, and Mayor Pro Tem and I will be paying close attention to his presentation and your thoughts about it. And we'll be moving forward with this committee in a very quick way, starting with this session today. So thank you very much again. Andy? City Manager Hall?
Councilman Spriggs, thank you very much. I am, there we go. I just needed to make sure I get the PowerPoint too. It's having a tough time advancing at some points. Thank you, both Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs. Really appreciate it. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the structure of the meeting so that we can, again, Zoom has been a great resource to us during these times of the pandemic, but it can be a little bit awkward. So I just wanted to run through this real quick. So first, thank you for joining us very much. Our intention was to admit everyone to the meeting and then place you on mute and video turned off unless you're called on to speak or ask a question, which we'll have a lot of time for question and answer during the meeting. But if we missed you and your dog is barking, please mute yourself. We have found out that dogs barking on Zoom are kind of like car alarms. We've learned to kind of not hear them. But if we do get some background noise, feel free to mute yourself. We'd appreciate that. When we do get to the question and answer, though, to ask a question, go to the participants button on the ribbon, and you'll see when you press that, you'll see raise your hand. And you can raise your hand, and that will let the hosts know that you have a question. And that at that point, they can unmute you, and that way we're not talking over each other, and we can hopefully keep some order to the meeting. But if you're on the phone, that same notification to the host will be given by pressing *9. And then, you know, just as I was trying to get my PowerPoint to work again, be patient. Zoom meetings always have a surprise or two. So we may hit a surprise or two as we go through some of this presentation and agenda this morning. So I did want to share with you the agenda. The Mayor Pro Tem and council member felt like we should set aside the entire morning. They wanted to do it on a weekend where people wouldn't be constrained with work, and give everybody, as many people as possible, the chance to participate. So we intend for the meeting to go all the way until noon, if needed. So we really appreciate everyone in attendance this morning. I've been asked to establish a financial baseline, and then we wanted to, after that's finished, the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Spriggs would like to discuss with you the key factors in the selection of a consultant to help us through this issue. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about the future meeting schedule. We'll have our comments and questions. And then, of course, the Mayor Pro Tem and council member will wrap things up. So I will start with some of the finances and give everyone just a little bit of a background in case you're not familiar with where the city is at the present time. So what you're looking at here are the FY20 general fund expenditures. Now remember, FY20 ended just a couple of weeks ago, June 30th of 2020. But this will give you an idea of how the city spends its money. You can see by that slide a little over half, about $11.5 million, a little more than half of our budget is spent on public safety, which includes the sheriff, the fire department, and the lifeguards, along with animal control. Then there's a small slice there for recreation. The non-departmental are things like legal costs and some of those kinds of things. Then we have the administrative area, which is the mayor and council, the city clerk, the city manager. And then, of course, most of the departments in the city fall under general operations, and that's the slice in orange there, and that's community development and public works and code compliance and all those kinds of things. So that gives you an idea of at least an overview of where we spend our money as a community. But I think that it's important for people to understand contextually, and then also with some comparative analysis, how we are funded compared to some of our neighboring cities. So you can see in the chart on the left-hand side, if we look at most of the cities in the county, you can see beginning with Del Mar and ending with Lemon Grove, how much we spend per resident in our communities. And you can see that Imperial Beach spends about $760 per resident. And we are kind of right there, equal with Chula Vista, and then the only city that's really lower than us is Lemon Grove. But then on the chart on the right, I think it's important to compare us with beach cities, because beach cities have some different dynamics that we need to deal with. We have a much higher percentage of our costs go towards tourism and visitors. And so on an average day in the summertime, the population of Imperial Beach can double. But our revenue doesn't necessarily double to reflect that. So when you compare us with the other beach cities in the community, you can see that per resident, we spend far less on per person in our community on our general fund. And I just want to tell you that, again, as a city manager, I just want to tell you that we have some incredible employees. It's amazing to me what we're able to get out of our general fund and how much we are able to accomplish. And a lot of that is because we have some great employees, but we also have great residents. There's a lot of pride in this community. People do everything they can to keep our community clean, safe, all those kinds of things. So we're able to operate our government. And you know what? I'd put us up against any one of those cities on the slide, and we're able to do it, I believe, for a much better price. But it does help us a little bit to do some comparative analysis. And so you can see that Imperial Beach has about 27,000 residents, and our per resident spending is about $760. If we took the average, not the high, not the low, but if we took the average per resident spending of all the study cities that you saw, it's about $1,350. And then if we took the average per resident spending of just the beach cities, that'd be about $1,606 per person. So if you then calculate that, if Imperial Beach, and you can kind of see it here in this center section, if Imperial Beach had the average per capita spending or per resident spending that you see in the other communities in the county, instead of a budget of about 21 million, our budget would be 37 million. And if we had the average spending that you see in the beach communities per resident spending of 1,606, our budget would be about $44 million. So we would have about $24 million if we were the average beach city. And that would allow us to do a lot of other things, including we may not be having the discussion. This discussion would be a little bit different this morning. But again, we have the constraints that we do in our community. So we just want to make sure that everyone understands where Imperial Beach sits in terms of finances. Now, cities are not allowed to deficit spend like we see at the state and national level. We do have to balance our budget. And in order to balance our budget, the last couple of years, we have had a reduction in city employee costs of about $300,000 in the last 2 years. I'm sorry, just in FY20. So we had to cut about $300,000 out in FY20 just to balance the budget. And the only department that was not reduced was the Sheriff's Department, because we're under contract with the Sheriff's Department. So in order to maintain that contract, we did have to cut back in the others. Now, there's also an impact on public safety. You can see there that in the last 2 years, we've had to reduce our fire department, which is our second largest budget, by $380,000. Essentially, they have gone from a budget of about $2.7 million down to a budget of about $2.2 million. And we were not able to fill our 12th firefighter position this year to balance the budget. So there are impacts on trying to keep up with not only the cost of public safety, but the general rising costs that we see in city government. So you might ask, where do your revenues come from? And this is kind of a breakdown of our major revenues. Now, you can see in the green there on the lower right-hand side, these major revenue sources that are on this screen, they reflect 82% of our revenues. The other 18% come from things like building permits, business licenses, some of those kinds of things. But these are the major sources of revenue that we have in Imperial Beach. And starting with property tax there on the right-hand side, you can see that our property tax is a little over $7 million, a big portion of our budget. The second largest portion of our budget comes from the Port of San Diego. You may or may not know that our beachfront and the pier are actually part of the Port of San Diego, the Port District of the Port of San Diego. And so the Port of San Diego pays us to protect their beach with lifeguards, to clean their beach with our Tidelands people. And then they pay a percentage of our sheriff's contract. They pay about 25% of our sheriff's contract and about 11% of our fire department contract or costs. So those two are, of course, the largest revenue sources that we have in the city. That green part that you see labeled as franchise tax, that is a tax that is assessed to the utility providers in our community, Cox Communications, AT&T, some of those utilities that we have in our community. And they are an important source of revenue as well. You can see that sales tax generates about $1.4 million in Imperial Beach. The gas tax, each time you fill up with gas, you do pay a gas tax, and that goes back into improving the roads and both local and regional roads. And then you can see our transit occupancy tax, and that tax is assessed to anybody that stays in one of our hotels. They pay a tax to the city, and that generates about $840,000. So again, about 3/4 of our revenues, well, maybe I should go back, about 3/4 of our major sources of revenue come from property tax in the Port of San Diego, just so everybody understands our revenue sources. So the council asked us, well, we should look at maybe generating some additional revenue, either through a sales tax measure or some TOT, so that we can keep up with some of the other cities. As you know, the city of Chula Vista, the city of National City, they have higher sales tax rates than we do. And so it's very difficult to keep up with a different taxing structure. But on this screen, what you can see is the sales tax comparison. Imperial Beach gets about $1.4 million from sales tax. Coronado generates about $3.7 million from their sales tax. And a city like Lemon Grove generates almost $6 million, $5.85 million from sales tax. But every city, of course, is structured a little bit different. So then when you look at TOT comparisons, you can see that the city of Imperial Beach generates about $840,000. Coronado, this is where Coronado certainly generates a lot of money. They're a smaller community than Imperial Beach, but they generate about almost $17 million in TOT, which is almost our entire budget. And then, of course, Lemon Grove, who doesn't have any hotels, they just generate about $50,000. Probably that's vacation rentals and a few things like that. So again, just between these two slides, you can see how each city is structured a little bit different. Unfortunately, for Imperial Beach, we are on the low end of both of those taxes that the city council really has the ability to either increase or remain stable. So that kind of gives you an idea of our revenues. We have recently completed a survey of things that our residents find to be important. And of course, a safe community is always been important to our community, and it continues to be. You can go on our website and you can participate in this survey, but we're finding that certainly residents want to be safe. But law enforcement is expensive. And so one of the things that we wanted to point out is that law enforcement is a percentage of your general fund. And if you look at the left-hand side, you'll see how we stack up in terms of law enforcement as a percentage of our general fund. And you can see that Imperial Beach ranks third highest by the percentage of money that we spend in our general fund on law enforcement. Now, when I say law enforcement, I mean the sheriff's contract. I'm not talking about fire or lifeguards. This is just the sheriff's contract. But again, because we are structured a little bit different, it's important for us to compare ourselves with the other coastal communities. And in the coastal communities, we spend, and I included San Diego as a coastal community, even though they're primarily not a coastal community. They do have a waterfront and whatnot. But we do spend the highest percentage of our general fund on law enforcement than any of the other coastal communities. So you can kind of see there some of the challenges that we are at least having financially with keeping up with the sheriff's contract. So again, if we go back and we look at these numbers and we extrapolate them and we do some comparative analysis so that we can talk about it, again, in the center section, if Imperial Beach had the average percentage spending on our law enforcement that the other communities do in the county, we'd spend about 30.6% of our general fund on law enforcement. And instead of having a budget of $7.5 million on law enforcement, we would have a budget of $6.3 million or $6.4 million on law enforcement. But then if we could have the average expenditure of the other coastal communities or beach cities that spend about 26.8% of their budget on law enforcement, our budget for law enforcement would actually look more along the lines of 5.5. And now that $2 million, again, if this was average, that $2 million would allow us to have some of the things that our community is asking the council to provide, things like the recreation program. We had to eliminate our recreation program a few years ago, literally just to make sure that we maintain a balanced budget. So that hopefully helps you see a little bit about how we compare. Now, one of the nice things is, and this is what Councilman Spriggs and the Mayor Pro Tem were both talking about earlier, our sheriff's department is doing a really good job in this community. We haven't always been the lowest crime rate in the county, but over the last 2 or 3 years, we've either been second or third lowest crime rate in the county, lower than cities like Coronado. And so they have been doing a fantastic job. But one of the things we would, I suppose, find is that even though we spent the largest percentage of our general fund on the crime rate, we didn't spend as much as the other cities. And so we were still able, though, by, you can see the cost per resident, we spend $277 per resident on law enforcement. The average city spends $371 and the average beach city spends $401, and yet we have the second or third lowest crime rate. So that goes to the residents, it goes to the good work of the sheriff, and then maybe it goes to, are there some other things we can do? Maybe it's not the amount of money that you spend on law enforcement that allows you to have a safe community. Maybe it's some of the other things that we can look at. I think most of you have seen this. This was in the newspaper. You can see that there has been a tremendous increase in the cost of the sheriff's budget. And that's just the across the board. I guess my point in this slide is that it's not just Imperial Beach. Law enforcement in cities, whether they have their own police department or the law enforcement budget at the county, they are both going up quite fast. And how does that really reflect in Imperial Beach? So the law enforcement in the last 2 years has gone up about 12%. And Councilman Spriggs referred to this earlier, but during that same time, our general fund revenues have only grown by about 4.5%. So you can see that the cost of law enforcement is just simply outpacing our ability to keep up with the law enforcement contract. We hear a lot, and I hear around town that we only have 2 patrol officers. So I thought we should make sure that everyone understood where we are. And this comes from the sheriff's website. And right now in Imperial Beach, we actually have 25.69 sworn officers in the community, which includes 2 CSOs. And that puts us about in the middle. Del Mar and Solana Beach and Santee have a slightly higher rate. You can see that Del Mar has 1.92 sworn officers. Let me go to this middle row that I'm looking at. Solana Beach has just about 1 sworn officer per 1,000. And then you can see Santee and Imperial Beach here. And then you can see Poway, Encinitas, Vista, Lemon Grove, the other contract cities. But it lets you know that we're kind of average, maybe just a little slightly on the higher end of average of sworn officers per 1,000 people in the county. So with that, I'll stop. But the Council Member Spriggs and the Mayor Pro Tem wanted me to just make sure that people understood that, yes, we have a lot of things to do and to talk about with law enforcement, but we also want to understand how it is impacting and how we stack up as a community in terms of our financial outlook in terms of the sheriff's contract. So hopefully that gives everybody a little bit of information, but Mayor Pro Tem, Councilman Spriggs, I'm open for any questions if you happen to have them.
That was a great presentation, Andy, and the council has seen it before, and it's great that you really boiled it down to the essentials. The one thing I would ask for you to clarify, it's really almost a yes or no, but you can probably add to it. We have had to make we've had to hold a vacant position and actually eliminate it in the fire department in order to balance our budget. What other impacts on the city staffing and city services has the escalating cost of the sheriff's contract had? And that's one thing, real quick on that. And secondly, do we have room to increase sheriff services on the upside, or are we looking more towards ways of reducing those costs on the downside? In your, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I think coming from you, those are critical questions. What has been the impact beyond the fire department, and what is our leeway up and leeway down vis-a-vis our city, balancing our city budget?
Councilor Spriggs, thank you very much. That's a great question. So just want everyone to know, I highlighted the fire department because they are a public safety department and the second largest department that we have in the city. Just for comparative sake, the sheriff's contract was slated for FY21 to be about 8 million. The fire department budget's about 2.3 million. So you can see it's kind of exponentially higher than any of the other departments that we have in the city. But each department in the city, at this point, each department in the city has had to reduce staff except for the sheriff's department, at least coming to FY20, the sheriff's department and the lifeguards. Now remember that the lifeguards and the tidelands are paid for by the port, so we didn't cut them back. Every other department that the city controls, we have had to make reductions. The question about whether or not we have capacity to increase the amount of the sheriff's department, of course, is a little anecdotal. The answer, of course, is yes. What that would mean is it would mean a reduction in other areas of the city. Now, what I will say is that in Imperial Beach, we have a lot of positions and even departments that are one deep. So if you start to cut any further into the existing personnel of the city, we would probably at this point have to start to eliminate some of the services that we provide to the residents. That's just math. I think a lot of people on the call here this morning recognize that in most of our positions, we're one deep. So any positional cuts at this point literally change the way, the amount of service that we can provide to the residents. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, we have taken all the meat off the skeleton and we're gonna nick bone. If we start to eliminate any further positions, we'll have to rethink our service provision.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, that's what I was trying to get you to articulate, what the impact would be on, what the impact has been on other departments and what the impact of continuing cost increases. A related question is anticipated increases over the next couple of years, given it's almost a straight line at around 5% or more per year with the sheriff's contract. So if nothing is changed, no changes in the sheriff's contract, and we renew that contract with the escalation in it that we've experienced so far, what will be the impact on the city? What will we do next?
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to punt that back to you. That will be a decision for the mayor and council, of course. But essentially, we would have no choice if we continue to to experience the increases that we've had in the sheriff's contract, and we want to continue to fully fund that. We would just have to make cutbacks in other parts of the city. So you might see, instead of just not having a recreation department, we may have to eliminate, I don't know. I could throw out any one of them and then everybody thinks that I'm after them, but we would have to eliminate some services from the city. So we're down to about 21 people in City Hall. And that includes basically everyone that we employ here at City Hall. So yeah, it's hard. I can't answer that question. It would be a decision that the council would have to make, but you would definitely have to restructure at least one of your departments if we were going to continue without either additional revenue. If the residents choose to increase revenue through a tax measure, perhaps this fall, without additional revenue or a reduction in the sheriff's contract, we would have to make cuts other places in the city to maintain the balanced budget, or spend reserves, which we don't have a lot of reserves. Right.
Yeah, well, reserves are one-time money. Once they're gone, they're gone. We're looking at recurring costs for services that, so we really need to look at sources of revenue that are also recurring and spend money out of those sources of revenue, not our reserves. I mean, the only thing that has really gotten us through this COVID-19 crisis has been the fact that we have, as a council over the years, worked very hard to build up reserves so that we've been able to maintain our employees pretty much during this COVID-19, and able to afford computers so they can work at home and that sort of thing. So we don't want to, I don't even want to talk about using reserves to fund an ongoing recurring cost. That's just off the table as far as I'm concerned.
Councilmember Spriggs, I just want to add that in addition to that, what also has kept us afloat is that we've paid off some of our debt and some of our unfunded liability, which we did, thankfully, before this pandemic hit. Unlike other cities that are now in even deeper trouble, right? Costs associated with the pandemic, in addition to this like unfunded liability that they're facing with pensions and so forth. So,
Right.
yeah.
You know, Mayor Pro Tem, if I can, I know we want to move on, so I know you're trying to preserve as much time as you can for comments, but I do want to point out, I think the Mayor Pro Tem made a really good point. The challenge that we are having fiscally has nothing to do with the mayor and council. The mayor and council have made brilliant financial decisions over the last, since I've been here, the 7 years that I've been here. You have been incredibly frugal with the people's money and made really, really wise decisions. It literally is that our revenue structure is a little bit different than our surrounding cities, and so it's difficult to keep up. But yeah, absolutely, the mayor and council have done a really good job with being the keepers of the people's money. They've done an excellent job.
So Andy, maybe you should move on quickly to the other agenda items so that we can open up questions and comments on the entire presentation.
Yeah, one of the things that has been really important to both the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs was what criteria should we use and how should we select a consultant to help us understand, are there some different ways to look at law enforcement? Are there some things that can be done? I've had the opportunity to visit another community who has done some alternative policing, and the police department is very, very supportive of it. And they have done some very unique things. And so it will be helpful, since none of us have had this conversation before, be helpful to get a consultant to help us wade through some of these issues, someone that's got experience with it. And I know this is, the Mayor Pro Tem told me that this is a really important issue for her. So we want to make sure that we discuss some of the key factors in the selection of a consultant or consultants, and some of the resources the city has that we might be able to infuse in there at low or no cost to also provide some assistance in that regard. So I'll let the Mayor Pro Tem kind of express some of her ideas and concerns about making sure we get the right consultant.
Sure, and it's really important to me because the community has expressed that it's important to them. They want to make sure that the selection of this consultant is done in a transparent and open way. We also want to make sure that this person has cultural sensitivity to the diversity of our community. We want to make sure that this person brings in extensive expertise on data analysis, that has experience working with cities as well and their budgets and their finances. We want to make sure that this consultant does their due diligence in taking all the information that we will gather through this process in the upcoming weeks, so that they could package it together in a way that is digestible for the community to understand and that fits the profile of our city in the best possible way. So the thing that we have, I guess, working against us is time, because we have an end date to this process because we have committed to present these recommendations together before the council by September 16th. So we have to do this in a swift manner. But I just want to remind everyone who's on the call today that we are open to recommendations, and we urge you to put those forward and send those in, because this selection process will be hopefully done in a swift way.
Now, I would just like to add that on that very last point, and then a couple of the earlier considerations that Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, this consultant and the authority to hire a consultant was approved in the council resolution that established this committee, and it's within, and the amount that we're talking about is probably under $20,000. I'm not sure what it would be for the short amount of time that we're talking about, but it's clearly within the city manager's discretionary authority. And it may even be within our sole source authority, so that we don't have to go through a lengthy request for proposals and review process. So it's really important to get everybody's input so that we can make those decisions quickly and factor in everything that that the community is interested in, and the considerations that Mayor Pro Tem just mentioned.
Thank you. I'll move then to probably the next critical issue, and that is, uh-oh, having a freeze again here. That's our future meeting schedule, because we need to have at least 4 meetings that were identified earlier before the city council meeting on September the 16th, which means essentially there are 8 weeks. And in those 8 weeks, we need to have 4 meetings. And so we need to have a meeting probably every 2 weeks. And I'm just going to throw it out there, and then the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs can help me through this. I would suggest we do those on the off weeks. On the, the city council meets the 1st and 3rd Wednesday of the month. Perhaps we could have these meetings on the 2nd and 4th weeks of the month. And but it's gonna move quickly. So if we're gonna have a next meeting in 2 weeks to talk about use of force, and then the exploration of some alternative services perhaps, and then look at the draft report and the second draft of the report. And then the only other thing I'd point out is that we really want to have a discussion of what are the best times and days to hold the meetings. So you can see there on that slide, we have about 8 weeks for those meetings. So Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs, I'll turn the time over to you to maybe talk about how we want to conduct these meetings, because we've got a tight timeline. I'm sure we could extend it, but why? We're in the middle of this. Let's get this to the council in that 90 days. I think people will appreciate that.
I mean, you've already said it well, City Manager Hall. The process that we're looking to do is what suits our community best, because this is going to be a collaborative process. We want to make sure that we host these meetings during a time and a day of the week that people are available. Now that things are much different than traditionally they have been, we're all working remotely, and we different timelines and schedules with our families. So we just want to make sure that we do them in a way that provides ample opportunity for everybody to provide their feedback. This is a collaborative process. And again, I want to reiterate that we were appointed, Councilmember Spriggs and myself, as the Ad Hoc Committee by the council. So we want to make sure that this Ad Hoc Committee receives all the community input that's necessary so that we can present these recommendations at the end of the 8-week process. So we are open to suggestions. We can put some proposed dates and times forward for you all. But again, this is really going to be a community-driven process. So whatever works best for everyone is the direction that we're going to take. And like City Manager Hall mentioned, we do have that potential option of extending it even further, but we want to make sure that we remain within the commitment that Councilmember Spriggs and I brought before the council to present these recommendations on September 16th. And I see that Councilmember Spriggs is back. I don't know if you want to add anything, Councilmember.
No, I think you covered everything. I tried to talk a little bit about the diverse skill set that we're looking for, and from my prior experience in trying to find people for a specialized task that requires really cross-cutting skills, it's not easy to find the right person that meets all of those. So we will have a little bit of a challenge there, and I'm hoping that we can get this done fairly quickly. And here's probably the most important thing. Mayor Pro Tem and I, as city manager, and all of you who are participating in this are going to review the work of this person and the information, and we are going to be the ultimate jury on its usefulness and effectiveness and unbiasedness, etc. So in selecting the contractor or the consultant, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We need to get somebody who can help us collect the information and digest it. If the person doesn't meet every single criteria 100%, it's better for us to move forward with this process with less than perfection than to argue over trying to find the perfect person and never get the job done. So that's my comment there. And you never get the perfect person for any job. They grow into the job if it's long enough and they have the time and the mentoring and all that, and they become the perfect employee or the perfect consultant, whatever, once they are on board. But initially, you have to make compromises, and that's probably what we need to think about.
Present company accepted, of course. But no,
well, you've grown into this job tremendously, Andy. Let's face it.
I'm ungrowing right now, which is good. Hey, Councilman Spriggs, then kind of moving, because I know there's going to be people that are going to want to now include comments and questions. I kind of wanted to go over again how people can get involved, and there's really 3 ways that we are getting, 4 ways. One is I received several written comments, and so the pauses in between people raising their hand or using *9, we'll try to get some of the written comments in. And then there has also been a chat feature. I think some of you have already found it. I think everyone's getting very familiar with Zoom now, right? There's been several people that have submitted questions via chat that I can't see on my screen because I'm the one sharing my screen, but we can have Jackie or even if the Mayor Pro Tem or Councilman Spriggs can see those, they could even read some of the chat comments and we could talk about those.
Yeah.
So to moderate that, maybe what we should do is, because I'm glad to read the written comments a little bit later for people that have taken the time to join us, unless Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs, you have a different idea. The people that have, given up their Saturday morning, maybe we should start with the people that have a life.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so Jackie, who's sitting, by the way, socially distanced from me, can tell me whose hand is up, and I'll read that to you, and you'll be unmuted, and you'll get a chance to make your comments. And keep them brief if you can, so that everyone gets a chance.
Good morning. Currently, no one has raised their hands, but we do have some chat comments. I will begin with the first one. The first one is from Cheryl Quinones, and her question is, will the November 2020 ballot measure on sales tax increase include language how we will use the money for law enforcement? We asked for that at the 2 town hall meetings with you.
Mayor Pro Tem, would you like me to answer that one?
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm hearing an echo. I think it's gone now. Is it gone? Okay, thank you. I think that was coming through Jackie's. So yeah, that's a really good question. Should the city council, so the city council, we really try to keep July dark like we do every year. That's the 1 month a year that we try to allow council members to go on vacation and even staff to take a breath in July. And we did our very best, but in order to have items placed on the ballot in the November election, that has to be done by August 7th of the year. And so we have asked the city council if they would have a special meeting on July 29th to consider whether or not to put a tax measure on the ballot. And the city council will consider that. There are 2 ways that you can pass a tax measure. One can be a directed tax measure, which means we are passing this tax measure to go directly to public safety. Or there can be a general tax measure, and that means we believe that the city needs additional revenue that can be spent on public safety, on recreation, on all the things to make the services in the community better. If you have a directed one that says all money will be spent on public safety, then the threshold to pass that tax measure is 66.6% or 67%, basically. If it's a general tax measure to increase the revenues of the city to continue to provide the general services in the community, you need to attain a 50% passage on that. So that's one of the things that the city council will be considering. Now, it's clear to me, if you look at our budget, where a majority of, and we went through those slides earlier, where a majority of our budget is spent on law enforcement, I don't foresee from our mayor or council, who want safety in this community as much as anybody else, I can't see that a large portion of any revenue that we were able to generate from the passage of a tax measure would not be spent on keeping the community safe, on public safety. Again, when they take their oath, it's to protect this community from all enemies, foreign and domestic. That is their very first obligation, is to keep you safe. So what we would say is that, just like it is now, a majority of our funding will go to keep this community safe. I hope, and Cheryl, if that didn't answer your question, feel free to either chat back in or ask another question. Go ahead.
Well, can I ask another question?
Oh, yes.
Please, Andy, thank you. Our two town hall meetings with you at Central and Oneonta, we had a full house there that we talked about the ballot measure and the language that directly, specifically would include language that the money gleaned by the tax increase would support the sheriff costs. And so in talking about this with our community the last 6 months, I personally, as a community member, remember that we all in the room said the ballot measure should point directly at how we are going to spend that money, and our community would get behind that because of the contract costs. And you shared with us if a 1% increase was requested by the community, or if a 2%. And I was so grateful for the presentations that you provided the community. But we do need to direct that money to law enforcement and or the whole first responders in our communities, because it's not only the sheriff, but our fire department. We need specific language that our community can wrap their arms around, knowing that it's specifically for that reason. But if we just put a blanket ballot measure on there, I don't see how our community will welcome that, because we don't know where that money will go except for to the general fund.
Cheryl, thank you for that. I think that you made a really good point. So when I say directed, if the tax measure was directed directly to the sheriff's department, that would be a 67% attain rate. Where you said, look, this is for public safety. This could be for the sheriff. It could be for the fire department. It could be for lifeguards. It could be for code compliance. Those are the kinds of, and that's the kind of language that is being considered on this tax measure. That would be considered a general tax. We don't think it makes any sense to put out language that just says, yeah, just pass it. It's going to go to general fund. We have no idea how it's going to be used. The language will be clear on what the priorities of the city council are. And I know that, again, if you just look at our current budget and the conversations we've had with the council, public safety that's the safety of our residents and the safety in our communities, whether that is speeding, whether that is cleanliness, whether that is all those kinds of things. Absolutely, those are priorities of the council, and that's the way that the measure will be written. But I apologize, it's really weird. I know my eyes keep wandering. It's hard to look at a computer, so I apologize if I'm looking around. It's hard to talk into a black box. But that was, and Cheryl, we really appreciate the fact that you're on the school board and understand how these tax measures work. And so I think that you're trying to share ideas. Some of your comments are probably rhetorical, because I think you know the answers to them. So I appreciate you framing them that way so that everyone on the call can understand a little bit better how tax measures work. So thank you for your comments. And yes, absolutely, you're right. There will be specific language, how the money will be used, but probably not for a specific task, which would trigger the higher threshold for the passage.
And if I may, I just want to remind everyone on this call that that's precisely why we need all of you who have those views or different views to come to the next council meeting when this specific item will be considered. Because I want to remind everyone that it's just not Council Member Spriggs and myself, but it's 5 of us on the council that need to hear from you. And they are not obviously on this call, or may not even necessarily be able to watch the recording from this call. So that's why it's so important that you come to council and provide these comments during our next council meeting.
Okay, City Manager Hall, the next chat comment is from Leonard Miranda, and he also has his hand raised. Can we take both simultaneously? Okay, we'll begin with his written comment, and it is, will the PowerPoint or a PDF of all presentations in this meeting be available to participants in this meeting?
I'm unmuted, am I?
Answer that one, Leonard, real quickly for you. Yes, we have recorded this meeting, and not only have we recorded it, we had a request by the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs to make sure that we translate it into written record also. So yeah, both the written record and the electronic version will be available. Yes.
Okay, great. Can I follow up with a couple of quick questions here audibly? Hello.
Yes, please. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. So the first question is the issue with the speed of having to do this and the volume of information that's going to be presented on the September 16th meeting. One of my thoughts are the 90 days that we had is already below 60 days, and we're pulling off the first meeting. And I'm just concerned, what is the primary impetus for getting to that September 16th date? What is the urgency that something of this scope has to be done that quickly?
Okay. I'll answer that one first. We have an annual contract with the sheriff, and in order for us to make any modifications to that contract, those modifications have to be submitted to the sheriff prior to May 1st on a regular year. This year, they extended that deadline to June 30th because of the COVID-19 situation. Imperial Beach called them and said, look, we're having a conversation in our community about the sheriff's contract and what we can do. Are there some modifications, some different things that we can do to try and realign our budget with our sheriff's contract? And they gave us a 90-day extension so that if we need to make different or changes to the contract, they allowed us to have an extra 90 days to make changes to the contract. So that's where the 90 days came in. Leonard, hopefully that helps. That's where the magic 90 days came from.
Okay, yeah, and I think with the scope of this thing, they probably would give us another extension if it was necessary. If we're actually talking about cuts to their office, you know, so maybe that could be extended, and not to make this drag out forever because there is some urgency, it sounds like, from different parties. But if maybe we can find out if it would be possible, once we get into the weeds on this thing, it may be more comprehensive than we think. And then as far as the consultant that you're looking at to get for this process, who has to be culturally sensitive and understand budgets, understand use of force, and kind of distill this into something that everyone on the ad hoc committee can review and look at. Will any of the members that are the citizen members of this committee be able to listen in or at least participate in that selection process so that the right questions are asked of that consultant? Not that you all can't do it, but maybe there's some expertise among some of the members of this ad hoc committee on the citizen side.
I will let the mayor I'm not a member of the ad hoc committee, so I'll let the mayor pro tem and or Councilman Spriggs answer that question, but thank you for it.
Yes, thank you, Leonard. I want to clarify that this ad hoc committee doesn't necessarily have community members on it. It's made up of Councilmember Spriggs and myself. I think that's something that Councilmember Spriggs and me can consider because, like I mentioned, I know that is something that is important to the community when you know, we go through the selection process of a consultant or a contractor. So we'll definitely take that into consideration as we move forward and identify potential candidates so that we can then subsequently make that selection process.
You got that. And then some of the other things to keep in mind for this, and I'm sure you'll distill this, but the offset that the port has that was mentioned, the 25% for law enforcement, as we look at positions maybe that might be cut and civilianized, one of the important things would be to find out if that occurs, does the port still give you that 25% offset for whatever position has changed from law enforcement to civilian, and how that impacts us, because then it's only a 75% savings if they don't. So there's some things in there, and I'd be happy to volunteer myself and maybe speak to you and Councilmember Spriggs as far as that consultant review process, because I do have a lot of insight into police budgets and to law enforcement use of force, and I'm also very culturally sensitive as well. And so I think that balance that you're trying to reach, I would be more than willing to participate in that selection process to help vet whoever you come up with a list for potential candidates to fill that position that you're looking for.
Maybe I can just touch on the port question. Yeah, the port contract is actually a number that was generated, and we have a 9-year agreement with the port. We're in year 7 of that. So we are just starting our renegotiation process with the port now for those. That percentage is just happens to be the percentage of our law enforcement costs. It's not a percentage that's included in the contract. At the time when it was developed 9 years ago, there was a study of how much of the law enforcement time was spent down at the waterfront. And at that point, there was just an escalator built into the contract. It goes up by the CPI in the county. So that percentage just happens to be what the percentage of our sheriff's contract is now. There's not a percentage in the contract. I know that's confusing, but hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, it sort of does. And I don't want to get buried on that, but that would be I'd like to understand a little bit clearer as far as how that pencils out for your actual budget. So yeah, so that was it. The other thing was just that offer there to participate in that. And then we'll leave it at that for now. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre and Councilmember Spriggs, a few questions came in regarding the composition of the Ad Hoc Committee. So I will read those now since you kind of addressed that already. But Cheryl Quinones wrote 3 emails: who's on this committee, who else is on this committee, and followed with where is our mayor, community should be included in the Ad Hoc Committee. And then there was a question from Delia Michelle Huffman: did this committee elect themselves and therefore gave themselves this money?
So to address the first question about the mayor, we can't have more than 3 members from the council on it, because then it would be a Brown Act violation. So that's why we only have the 2 council members on it. And then the ad hoc was unanimously voted on by the entire council during our last council meeting. So it is, like I mentioned, comprised of council member Spriggs and myself. The ad hoc has not received any money. As you heard earlier, we are considering using some of the discretionary funding that City Manager Hall has to his availability to supplement the costs related to a consultant who has the, hopefully, expertise to analyze data and all the other traits that we have mentioned earlier that are important to not just us on the ad hoc, but to the community itself. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, we have a raised hand from Gary Brown. Gary Brown, you are unmuted.
Yeah, hi. In some of the questions, I think Ms. Quinones was asking, her written question was related, she said a sales tax, I believe. My question is, and then the city manager mentioned a tax measure. Has it been decided definitely to go for a sales tax, or is council considering a sales tax and other forms of tax? to be put on the November ballot.
Thank you, former city manager Gary Brown. So just wanted to let you know, we have not had as you know how this works, we have not had an opportunity to discuss this with the city council at this point because it's not been agendized. The surveys have been completed in the community. We have some information back from the community surveys. If anybody else would like to take a survey, feel free to go to our website, and there's an area there called JTC, which is Join the Conversation, and people can fill out surveys there, and we track those, and we will be providing that information to the city council here in about 10 days before their next meeting on the 29th. Mr. Brown raises a really good point. There are really three types of taxes that the city council could consider raising. One is the property tax. That doesn't, in Imperial Beach, that doesn't help us a lot, partly because our entire community is in a redevelopment zone. I could give you a very complex answer, but the reality is that probably isn't the best way for the community to look at revenue increase. There are two other taxes that the city council could look at: the sales tax and then the transit occupancy tax, which was that hotel tax we were talking about earlier. The sales tax, if the sales tax was raised by 1 penny, so right now, of the sales tax that you pay when you go to eat dinner, the 7.5% that you pay when you go to eat at one of our restaurants, 1% goes to the city. So 1 penny of each dollar goes to the city. The other 6.5 goes to other entities, the state, to the county and other entities. If we now got 2 cents of every dollar, what that would mean is that the increase would be about $1.4 million to the city. If we were to raise our TOT to be equal to the highest in the county, which is in Del Mar, our TOT right now is 10%. That would raise it to 13%. That would generate about $400,000. So the sales tax certainly generates about $1 million more than the TOT would, because we don't have very many hotels in our community. And the ones we have are relatively small in comparison with things like, you know, the Dell or Lowe's or the Marriott in Coronado that have hundreds of rooms. So what the other decision that the county council hasn't made is, should we be looking at both? Should we be looking at raising our sales tax and our TOT? If we're going to do this, do we do it? So that was a very good question, Mr. Brown. We have not had a chance to talk with the council about it, but we'll be doing it here in just the next few days.
Andy, I'd like to come in for a second on a procedural item. At 9:58, Marcus Boyd wrote to all of us that his raise hand feature isn't working. And I wrote back to him to type in his question, but he hasn't done it yet. Because of the sequence of the questions, we really don't want to, I don't think we should pass him over to go to later questions on the that have been typed in. Let's see what he has to ask.
Yeah, it's raised now.
Okay.
So,
Okay. The next speaker is Marcus Boyd. You are unmuted.
Hi, thank you. A couple of things, Mr. Hall. Regarding the option to put sales tax or tax on the ballot, I didn't hear you mention cannabis tax, but I know you've discussed it. Is that off the table?
Mr. Boyd, that's a really good question. So right now, one of the decisions we had to make was that the city council has authorized one retail outlet for cannabis in the community. And so if we go to the residents and ask them to raise tax on cannabis, which we could do, we looked at the potential revenue increase, and it's relatively small, only because we have only one outlet. And so that was the only reason that we did that, is that it costs, of course, it costs money to put every ballot measure on the ballot. This year, we've been told that they between 9 and 25,000. Is that, do you know, Jackie, what the cost of a ballot measure?
Oh, gosh.
Anyway, it costs, we kind of looked at, it would cost almost as much to put it on the ballot as it would for what would be generated. And then the city council is looking at the potential of having a second dispensary maybe in the future. And so we may consider it at that time. Again, I don't know if that answers your question, but where we only have one, it would not generate very much revenue.
I see. I didn't know you had an expectation of 10,000 a year of tax income from a cannabis dispensary. I just hadn't seen the breakdown of the discussion on that. So you think the revenue for one location would be what?
So if we were to have a, you know, and some of the cities have had larger sales tax on cannabis as much as, you know, 5%. So if you have a cannabis outlet that, you know, generates $1 million, you could generate as much as $50,000 if you did a 5% tax on it. But again, it depends on the size of the retail outlet and how much revenue they would generate.
Yeah, and I think the 1,050,000 is a closer number than it is the 10. So I just wonder why that is being passed over so easily. And couldn't that be piggybacked on any other initiative, a tax initiative in general that includes all the different, or do they each have to have their own initiative?
That's a great question. Each one has to have its own initiative. So if we did a tax on cannabis, it would have to be a separate measure.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to ask that was based on your last comment. But prior to that, my original question, I just didn't hear anything about receiving the data that I know we all, the council as well as the public has asked for from the sheriffs that would, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about the city's crime rate being lower, but no data being provided to show that it is due to the sheriffs and not due to the public itself. Or the laws that have passed recently, like shoplifting, is that being counted? Are the numbers being fudged a bit? And I think, you know, data is missing.
Yes, that's a really good point. The Ad Hoc Committee asked me, and I have put forward a request from the Sheriff's Department to give us information on not only the crime rate and the crime statistics, and we have some of that information that will actually be shared at the next meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee when we talk about use of force policies and other things. But also, we're trying to extrapolate that down. So rather than it being a Sheriff Department data set, we want it to be very specific to the city of Imperial Beach.
Just to add to that, we want to make sure that, yes, so that we want this to be a data-driven process, and we have made those requests. We want to make sure that we review how many calls are being made for, you know, violent offenses, or how many calls are being made for traffic or noise complaints or whatever. Those are the types of, that's the type of data that we want to collect from the sheriff, in addition to the review of use of force practices and policies. And we also want to make sure that we collect sociodemographic data as well. So we want to look at the entire data set, and that's the deep dive that I was referring to that we will make during the next meeting. As City Manager Hall already mentioned, we've requested that data. I don't believe we've received it yet, Andy, but once we do, that's what we're going to work on reviewing alongside, hopefully, with a consultant that will be able to really dive deep and even perhaps even you know, ground truth some of these reports with whoever is making the reports or making the calls, or if there is a case produced, even to the point of going back to the court and looking at you know, cases that have been filed relating to crimes in Imperial Beach, or you know, suspected crimes, or also any complaints also made towards the Sheriff Department and whatnot. So a whole range of data is what we want to gather, because we want this, again, to be a very data-driven process.
Yeah, we're really working on a balance here between the timing of the completion of this report and keeping within a reasonable scope of what we're trying to do so that we come up with something that's meaningful for the community and useful for the council to consider, versus really exploring all kinds of different avenues, which, in other words, we've got to be concerned about mission creep, which kills many initiatives. I following up on the Mayor Pro Tem's comment, I also think we should try to interview individuals in the community who've had encounters with the sheriff and get personal anecdotal information on an anonymous basis on whether their experience is corresponds with what's in the sheriff's data or arrest report or encounter report. We all know, and we've seen evidence in the news and in investigative reporting, that sometimes there's a discrepancy between police reports and what actually happens. And in terms of our own community and how our community has been served, or the experience that community members in Imperial Beach have had with the sheriff, it would be good to get some of that personal anecdotal information to go along with the data itself, to bring life to the report. Now, how far we can go with that, how much of that we could gather in the time that's available, that is, I think, an open question. But clearly, it would be valuable information to go along with objective empirical statistics and from the sheriff. So that's just my comment. We are, Mayor Pro Tem and I, with the help of the city manager, we're gonna have to make some really critical judgments about how deep to go and how much time to spend on different aspects of this report. And I'm just saying up front that those are going to be difficult choices. Not everybody is going to agree. This could go on for 180 days or a year or longer if we really wanted to cover everything in great depth, but that's not what we're going to do. We really want to come up with something that's useful within this time frame and do the best we can with what we have within this time frame, and see what we come up with. My view, and this goes to an earlier question, if we need a 30-day extension or something like that, then we'll ask for it. But we're not going to go 180 days, a half a year. These are issues that are germane to this community now, and the contract negotiations are time specific. We've got to deal with them now within the next few months, and we're going to do that, and we're going to do the best we can with this committee process that we're all engaged in together. But I just want everybody to know that there are some real trade-offs here, and we can't do everything, but we really want to be able to have a discussion with the sheriff about the nature and quality and type of services, what adjustments are needed in the contract, and what alternative services can be provided to this community that are needed, but best provided in alternative ways. Those are the kinds of things we need to be able to do. And we've got to just stay focused on getting the information needed to have those conversations and negotiations. Thank you.
So Councilman Spriggs, I just wanted to follow up on that because I think it's really important. In a previous meeting, Mr. Boyd and I had by the way, we share a very good relationship. I speak and feel very highly of Mr. Boyd, and we have had some great conversations. But each of us have different experiences with the sheriff. Of course, I'm very supportive of the sheriff, and they've been nothing but very respectful and have been very helpful to me. And we all take our jobs of keeping this community safe. That's really, really important to us. But I've also been able recently to have conversations with the sheriff about, are there other ways that we can deal with some of the non-violent calls, or are there other things that we can do to try to defray some of the costs? And again, I had an opportunity to visit another community that has done that for almost 30 years. And I think that there are some things that we can do as a community to reduce our law enforcement costs, but not impact the safety. The safety of this community has to come first. And again, everyone's had different experiences. Mine has been extremely positive with the Sheriff's Department, and I think that they do a good job. But are there things we can improve? Always. There are always things that we can do to improve. So I thought those were really good comments. I appreciate them.
Okay, the next chat comment is from Richard Pilgrim. He has a comment and a question. He says, alternate Saturday morning meeting days puts us on schedule if we have working papers in between. And then he asks, how does our sales tax rate compare to other cities?
Let me unmute. There it goes. Oh, sorry. Took me a minute to unmute. Hey, Dick, I really appreciate your questions. As far as the schedule goes, yeah, I think we're going to talk about that at the very end and kind of get a poll. I think Councilman Spriggs had mentioned maybe trying to get maybe turn off my share screen and put everybody on the screen and see if we can kind of do hands raised of best days or whatnot. But in terms of the sales tax and how we compare with other cities, Chula Vista and National City both have the 1 cent sales tax that's higher than ours. So they have that. The city of Coronado has the same as Imperial Beach now. They have 1 penny per dollar. The difference in Coronado is that their war chest really comes from TOT. And we probably can never compete with that. We're built out. We don't have the land mass that we could ever have the number of hotel rooms that Coronado has. So the sales tax in our community simply generates more than the TOT. So hopefully that answers your question. Chula Vista and National City, which are our neighboring cities, do have the extra 1 cent. Coronado does not. I don't know if that helps. Hopefully that helps.
Jackie, you gonna read the next question? Oh, I see they're chatting.
Okay, sorry about that, madam. The next speaker or the next chat is from Allison Hoover, and she asks, how much do you expect TOT to rise from the New Hampton? And can we look into taxing short-term rentals?
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. Short-term rentals are considered, they do have to pay TOT. So if the TOT was raised, it would be raised on short-term rentals. So that $840,000 that we generate in TOT, that includes the short-term rentals in the community now as well. As far as the the TOT that would be generated from the Hampton Inn, I can give you general numbers. To be specific, they have proprietary protections. I can't tell you exactly what it would be, but essentially, if we were to raise the TOT by that 3%, it would generate in the neighborhood of $150 or between $150 and $200,000 from the New Hampton Inn.
City Manager Hall, you partly answered this question. It's a little vague, and it's from Jenny Nesbitt. What would be the increase in taxes that would be proposed in the measure if passed?
Thank you for that. And I know that we are here to talk about law enforcement, but the finances are a big part of that, and that was really the focus of today's meeting. So I really appreciate everybody asking these questions. So what would happen is on the items in the community that are sold, that are taxed, like when you go out to a restaurant or whatnot, you would pay 1 penny more per dollar spent. So if you spend $100, you'd pay an extra $1. And that would not apply, for instance, to groceries, because groceries, we don't pay sales tax on groceries in our state. Part of the reason that we've started looking at a sales tax is some people like the idea of a TOT because only tourists pay for that. Residents don't pay for the transit occupancy tax unless they stay in a hotel. Some people do staycations, but for the most part, that is going to be paid for by the tourists. One of the challenges we have in Imperial Beach is, again, we're a city of about 27,000 and we have less than 200 hotel rooms. I was speaking with a former or colleague of mine who is in Pismo Beach, a city of about 8,000 people. They have 2,000 hotel rooms. So you can see that TOT is very important in most coastal communities. Imperial Beach just doesn't have a lot of hotels. For a beach community, we have very few hotels. So our TOT doesn't generate quite as much. And that's why we're looking at the sales tax, because in Imperial Beach, most of our visitors come for the day. They come from maybe inland areas, Santee or Chula Vista or areas to our beach. They do frequent our restaurants and some of those other things. And so the best way for us to capture some of those costs that we incur by having them come to our community is to have them pay some extra sales tax when they eat at our restaurants or buy things in our stores. Again, it is so hard to talk into a box without getting any feedback. I hope that I've answered your question. If not, feel free to ask it again. I apologize, trying to answer these the best I can without a whole lot of feedback.
Okay, the next message is from Mark Williams, and he says, has the city considered working with local community youth groups such as Boy and Girl Scouts, sports and cheer, as well as schools? Having a city parks is great, but providing a gateway for children to join existing organizations will give a lot more bang for the buck. Should I move on?
Oh, no. I didn't know if the Mayor Pro Tem or Councilman Spriggs wanted to answer that, but no, it has been a stated priority of the City Council to find more ways to engage our youth, whether that's a reintroduction of our own recreation program, more support for the Boys and Girls Club, Little League, girls softball, the Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, all the other entities you mentioned. It is a stated goal of our City Council to provide more opportunities for our youth. And again, Mark, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big priority for us to engage our youth. We're very limited in the types of programs that we have in the city. We've talked about this ad nauseum. There's absolutely a need to increase funding for the resources, recreational resources for our youth, to get them into programs. We've been discussing even partnering with other cities. So absolutely, yes, we absolutely intend to look into these types of groups that are already providing those services. But again, we want to make sure that they're the best possible programs out there for our kids.
Mayor Pro Tem, if I can add to that, I know some of the conversations I've had with elected officials, and it goes back to Cheryl Quinonez's question, and that is, about where do we use this revenue? One of the things that we want to do is make sure that we're taking a comprehensive approach to public safety and to community safety, and recreation is one of those. Having our kids engaged in very positive activities is a form of public safety. And we want to be able to make sure that at least if we generate some revenue in the community, that we can at least use some of those resources to engage our youth in more productive activities, and that is a form of public safety. So yeah, the council's made it very clear that this is a comprehensive approach. And again, in Imperial Beach, the sheriffs have done a great job. Are there some things that can improve? Man, I've got a lot of improvements to make, as we all do, but I know that it has been a very high priority of our council to find ways to engage the youth in a positive way, for sure.
The next question is from Jennifer Almada. What is the range of location of consultants that you will be seeking? Will the Ad Hoc Committee be doing the recruiting themselves, or will you be using a firm to recruit candidates?
I think we mentioned that earlier. We're probably not going to use a firm to recruit candidates. We're open to suggestions from the community for potential candidates. We discuss a bit if we will consider having members of the community on the selection board, if you will, or not. That's something that Councilmember Spriggs will consider and discuss. The range, obviously, we mentioned earlier several times, we want to make sure that they have the expertise to analyze data, that they have the cultural sensitivity to understand the diversity within our community, and that they're able to, present the digested data in a way and engage the community in a way where we can come up with some pretty well-rounded recommendations by the end of this process. And Councilmember Spriggs, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yes, I think I would just add that, emphasize a point that Mayor Pro Tem made just now, and that's if any of you who are participating in this, because you guys are extremely important and valuable resources in this process and part of it, if you have candidates in mind, get them to send their CV, their resumes into the city manager as soon as possible. We're on a fast track here, and we're going to need to review candidates and make a decision within probably a week or so, in that order of time, in order to have any kind of work done for our next meeting. So, and the meetings after that. So, this is going to be very challenging. And like I said, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but we need to get all of your, if you have comments on this, on the criteria, if you have candidates, send them in, have those candidates send in their resumes. We need to go slam bang on this in order to get the resources to do this investigatory work. Now, I'll say this with all respect to our great city manager. The council understood, originally he wanted to actually handle this work himself. And the council basically said, look, this is going to require a deep dive into various areas and some specialized expertise. And number one, and number two, you're running our city, and everybody else on the city staff is already working at about 110, 120%. You saw how thinly staffed we are in Imperial Beach. We can't task anyone in our city government to do this. We've got to really if we want to do a good job or a reasonably good job, we've got to get some external expertise working on this. And so now is the time. I actually, if it had been my druthers, I would have liked to have, at this meeting, presented some candidates already for us to look at least to let you all know, who some of the candidates are and what some of their skill sets are, and just get comments on that. I don't think we can wait until the next meeting to do that. So we're running a little bit late, I think, in this whole process. So I'd like to accelerate it by asking you to send in, have anybody you think who meets these requirements, send in their CV or their resume. And if you have further thoughts about the criteria for the consultant, please send those in immediately to the city manager, and we will review all of that stuff very quickly, and because we've got to make some decisions. So thanks a lot.
Councilmember Spriggs and Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre, we have a request from Cheryl Quinones requesting when we will read the email comments. We have 10 to read, and we still have some chat comments as well as one raised hand. How would you like us to proceed?
Can we prioritize the folks who have their hands raised here, and then we'll go into the written comments unless you have a different sense, Councilmember Spriggs.
Oh, you're muted, Mr. Spriggs.
Okay. How are we doing on the chat comments and the raised hands? How many more chat comments and raised hands do we have at
We
this?
have, oh, sorry. We have 2 raised hands, one from Leonard Miranda and Gary Brown, 10 email comments, and several we have several chat comments.
Okay, so this is a tough task for you, but my recommendation would be that we take the raised hands and the chat comments from people who have not already raised questions or made comments, and then we go to the emails. So that, and then we come back again to those who've already, through the chat comments or raised hands, had something to say.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I was going to add. I didn't realize that some of the folks with their raised hands had already had an opportunity to speak. So I think that would be fair for everyone.
Okay, understood. I will move on to the next question. And it's from Angela I apologize, Zagamai. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. And she says, thank you for this meeting. Learning a lot. This is comment, not question. It sounds like the Sheriff's Department is taking a huge amount of our revenues at the expense of programs people like and need. Recreation, public works, housing, fire department. These sales tax increases sound like something we need to keep up with comparable beach communities. Those potential revenues shouldn't go to something that takes so much of the city budget, i.e. the Sheriff's Department. Thanks again. This is a comment. Okay. Okay, I'm skipping several as some of these comments were from people who already made comments. So I'm going straight to Mitch McKay, who hasn't provided a comment yet. Will the proposed 1% sales tax have a sundown clause, or will the city be looking for an in perpetuity non-terminating tax?
That's a great question. I've seen people want them both ways. First, a lot of cities. So what Mitch is talking about is when a city passes a tax measure, oftentimes there's what's called a sunset clause, which means it runs for 20 years and then it goes away. In some respects, I've seen some residents say, no, we don't want a sunset clause because we're tied into it for 20 years. The way we have worded it so far, although we're certainly open to input, is that the tax measure would run until the residents don't want it anymore and they vote it out. Because if in 10 years we have, we're financially stable and we've paid off some of our RDA debt and we're getting more property tax, we may not want it to run for 10 years or 20 years or whatever. And so in a lot of ways, some residents will say that they want the flexibility to say, look, we'll provide the sales tax until we feel like it's not being used correctly or whatever, and then we'll put it on the ballot and we'll take it away. The sunset does establish it for a set period of time. And so that's one of the things we're still working through. And when you talk to residents, some want to remain in control of the tax and others want to have a sunset clause for a set time. And so we're still trying to, again, get feedback from our residents. So that's a great question. We'd love to get your feedback about the best way to approach this kind of a tax. So thanks for the question.
I think that is a very good question, and it's we could go either way. I would just supplement the city manager's answer by saying that we have growing needs even if we do nothing more for the community. The sheriff's contract is one, but salaries for our firefighters and others, we are going to need to grow our revenues. And that doesn't mean adding new taxes, but it means figuring out how we can find revenue measures that will grow over time. I don't see a period in time where we're going to be reducing sales tax. the community needs more recreation. The community needs public safety. We need to have a viable public works department that takes care of our streets, sewers, etc. There's no period in history where city costs that I'm aware of have gone down unless they're forced to make budget cuts by revenue reductions. I think as an elected official, if a number of people come to City Hall when we're doing our budget reviews, say for next year's budget, or the budget after that, or the one after that, depending on whether I'm still on the city council. But any council member, when we're going through the budget process, if people come in and say, look, we're paying too much taxes, we're just not, we're looking at your revenues, you've now got other revenue sources, can you give us some relief on the property tax? I don't believe there's any city council that would ignore those requests from the public, particularly if we have found other revenue sources that are now providing or then providing the kind of revenues needed to have a recreation department, which we don't have. We had one, but we had to cut it during the years and years ago. So I think the mechanisms in our democracy allow for people to run for office based on a tax platform, people to come to city council and talk about the revenues, the taxes, the burdens, et cetera, and for council members to hear and respond to those concerns. So I'm in favor of not putting a sunset clause, which suggests that there's a fixed time period where this thing is going to exist no matter what, and then be automatically repealed unless it's extended by a vote of the people. I'm not really in favor of that. I just don't see us in a situation yet where there's not going to be a need for a sales tax or TOT or both to be increased at this point in time. This is an issue for council discussion. So I'm just really giving my own opinion, but I've tried to put a little bit of analysis behind that opinion in terms of our escalating costs and the kinds of services that we're not able to provide right now, especially in recreation, that the community wants and that we as a council have said that we want to provide. So it's really against that backdrop that I think we need to proceed with some ballot measures, and we'll see how the council discusses that this coming Wednesday evening.
Councilman Spriggs, before we move on, I think you made a really good point. I hope that the people on the call recognize, I love these meetings. I love the meetings when we can get together and talk to our community and get questions and have them be very organic and give you the best answers we can. But please understand, they're off the cuff. We're trying to give you the best answers we can without doing a lot of research on them. So a lot of these questions we will continue to research and really appreciate them and whatnot. But I really like these off the cuff and very organic meetings, but recognize them for what they are. So thank you for that.
Okay, the next question is from Wynn Heskela. She actually has two comments and they're associated with each other, so I'll read them both. The first one is the port still leasing our beach and street ends as initially established, or what is the current structure? And how is the contribution of the port established? Then she sends a second question, and let me just scroll down, sorry, bear with me. She says, how is the contribution from the port calculated and can it be increased?
Yeah, those are both really good questions and both related. So the port does continue to lease property from the city. They lease the street ends and they lease Pier Plaza and Dunes Park. the port owns a lot of property in Imperial Beach as well. They own where the Dempsey Lifeguard Center is. They own a piece of Dunes Park. They own the parking lot at at Seacoast and Elkwood and Palm and Seacoast. And then the port actually owns the beach from the high tide line west out to and including the pier and beyond the pier about a quarter of a mile. All of that is in the Port District. And so again, seeing no feedback, which I apologize for, I hope that that answers your question. The way that that contract is prepared is that we go through a very extensive cost analysis of what it costs us to first maintain all of the port property in the city. So the port parking lots, the pier, keep the beaches clean, the lifeguards, how many sheriff calls we get down there, how many fire department calls and rescues and some of those kinds of things. And then we do an analysis of how much that costs. We submit that to the port because again, I think that you got to remember that the port has determined, and I think that they're right, it would be more expensive for the port to have to bring the harbor police down here to do the policing every time that there was a call on the tidelands, or every time, you know, to bring their own lifeguard service down here to, again, this is the only beach the port has. The other port cities, for instance, in Coronado, the port does not include the beach. It's on the bay side in Coronado, and then in San Diego, Chula Vista, and National City, which are other port cities in San Diego. So this is their only beach, and that's why we have the lifeguards here protecting the port property. So again, that was a real high 30,000 foot overview of a very complex relationship between the port and the city, but hopefully that answers the question.
The next comment is from Charlotte West. I would like to advocate for the consultant to be former IB resident, Dr. Keisha Clark, an expert in racial justice and community issues with a Doctor of Management in Organizational Leadership. I believe she has already been in touch with the city. The next comment is from Paul Lazo. He has two questions. One, can we ensure that the consultant doesn't have a traditional law enforcement background? It doesn't make sense to hire people who only know how to use the one tool to address community safety. Number two, how was the nature of policing in IB changed over the years? After LEOs expected to carry out the same kinds of duties as they were years ago, or has their scope of work been expanded to include things that aren't traditionally law enforcement duties, i.e. interacting with homeless / mentally ill?
Those are great questions. I think those are questions that through our data analysis we'll be able to answer more thoroughly so that we could look at comparisons from what was it 2 years ago to now. And also, you know, want to acknowledge the comments and suggestions that were made relating to the consultant. So those are great comments and suggestions. So thank you.
We have a raised hand from Delia Huffman. I'm sorry. Delia, you're unmuted. Delia?
Okay. So. Hello. Can you hear me now? Hello.
Is this Delia Michelle
I'm
Huffman?
Sorry. This is Kevin Huffman, her husband. We're sharing
okay.
the phone this morning. Thank you. This question is for Pro Tem Aguirre and Councilmember Spriggs. In light of the recent happenings in the country regarding protests with Black Lives Matter movement and counter protests and so forth, and the violence that has ensued, this is a question kind of geared towards the City Council signing solidarity with Black Lives Matter. And this is a public safety question. Last night there was some chalk art at Palm and Seacoast. And one of the things that was written there was stomp out all you local racists. And often it's, you know, I've seen this many times on the news and quotes and so forth, that according to Black Lives, not the official website, but people associated with the movement, that all white people are racists. How does the city council signing a solidarity resolution with Black Lives Matter and having this hate speech on the sidewalks of our city promote city safety or community safety? And now that we're talking about possible reductions in law enforcement, how does that make me as a white man feel safe in our community? And I'll take my comments off of the air.
Well, I just want to clarify that the statement that we all signed was in support of Black lives. I know that there's a Black Lives Matter movement. We were in support of Black lives and condemning racism generally. Now, that being said, I think that there's a bit of a generalization that you're mentioning relating to the Black Lives Matter movement and how that is perceived by some and others. I wasn't aware of this chalk art, but I guess, you know, my understanding is that our ordinances allow for that to happen, and that is within the, I guess, First Amendment rights of anybody who wants to paint their art throughout the city. You know, I think that just, you know, obviously having those comments can be, I guess, inflammatory one way or another. I'm sorry that you feel unsafe. That's certainly not something that we want anyone in the community to experience. But just going back to your main point, like why did we support or issue that statement? We wanted to be very clear in our intent of condemning acts of violence or acts of racist violence as they relate specifically to Black lives, given the recent events that have happened nationally.
Yeah,
So
let me,
if I may, since I'm in this conversation, I do believe that, and we'll look back at the transcripts, you did say BLM, Black Lives Matter, that you guys signed a resolution in solidarity with them. And the chalk art last night was clearly Black Lives Matter, whether it was the official membership or people loosely associated with that. And at the same time, you have stomp out local racists, which is clearly hate speech. Do you condemn that hate speech?
let me take that question. I think all hate speech ought to be condemned. Whether that's hate speech or not is a question.
It's clearly violent.
No, it isn't. It's not directed towards anybody in particular. Now, I've had to deal with hate speech in lots of different contexts, not only the city of Imperial Beach, but the University of California, where I was employed as a senior administrator for a long time. And we had lots of that kind and other kinds of speech directed at primarily at people of color, sometimes against Jewish people. And trying to get that defined as hate speech when it is a general statement as opposed to directed at a specific individual, and particularly not even directed in a face-to-face manner, is difficult as a legal matter, I can tell you. So I think this comes down to how you are feeling as an individual with respect to that. And I, along with the Mayor Pro Tem, am sorry that makes you feel insecure. I had said in the very beginning that, and so had the Mayor Pro Tem, and this whole exercise is about striking a balance in our community between really maintaining high-level, top public safety services on one hand, and making sure that in our community, people feel safe in terms of excessive use of force and the appropriate use of sheriff services on the other, and on the third hand, that we are looking at affordability of all those services and what alternatives might exist. We are not condoning any kind of language that makes anyone in Imperial Beach feel unsafe or insecure. And that applies whether you're white, whether you're Black, whether you're Latinx, Asian, whatever. I think this council has tried to take the view that we are a welcoming community for everybody. And, the fact of the matter is that we've got a very diverse community, and we have to take into consideration, the diversity of our entire community. And that includes people of all different ethnicities and races, et cetera. And I think we've tried to do that. So I think that's probably the best that I can say. That I can understand how you might feel about graffiti like that. I know how I felt about it when it's been directed against Black people, which is more often the case in this country and in different situations. So I can empathize with how you feel. But as to whether technically it's hate speech or not, is not something that is easy to determine from a legal perspective. If it were hate speech, I would think, yes, we would be ready to condemn it, because hate speech is something we don't tolerate in Imperial Beach.
Absolutely. Well said, Councilmember Spriggs. I just want to add that, yes, we don't want anyone to feel unsafe. And I've also experienced, threats to my safety and life, especially during the campaign. And it's horrible. It's horrible. It's an experience that I would not wish on anyone. That really affects you. And if that's the way you're feeling, again, I want to say that I'm sorry that you're feeling that way. We want to make sure that everybody feels safe, that everybody feels as an integral part of this community. In that manner, I am sorry that you're feeling that way.
Well, I appreciate the comments. I wasn't, Mr. Spriggs, I really appreciate your comments too. I wasn't asking in a legal perspective. However, when I see the words "stomp you out" on the city, which my children are 5th generation Imperial Beach, and I too want to say that as a white man in San Diego, some of the neighborhoods I've worked, I have experienced reverse racism, if that's what you want to call it. I'm very aware of what it feels like. I've been nearly attacked because of my skin color. So I do know what it feels like. I just want to make sure that we're all safe in this community and that everybody can be included. So when we start to see, verbiage like that being emboldened in our community, and then I hear that our city council has signed a resolution with the exact same initials that I see written on that sidewalk, it concerns me, and I wanted to voice my opinion. So I really appreciate your time. I value you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre and Councilmember Spriggs, we have a raised hand from a caller who has not participated yet. Caller 345, you may speak.
Is that me?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. First off, I'd like to stand in solidarity with Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre. I am also, my name is Will Nimmo, since I'm calling from Zoom phone number. My registration wasn't working through my app, so bear with me, please. In my campaign for the city council, I've also run into instances where my life and my safety has been threatened. So I understand completely, and I don't think that any kind of hate belongs in our city. And I again would stand in solidarity with what you said. But this next statement or question rather would be directed towards City Manager Hall. I'm curious, per Councilman Spriggs' suggestion earlier to accept anecdotal information from our citizens, would it also be something to explore to allow for a survey of the citizens as well for some of the initiatives that this ad hoc committee might bring forward towards the city council, something for the greater community to supply some of their input. For example, with our COVID survey, it was clear, as you made that statement on Wednesday during the meeting, that public safety is the citizens overwhelming. I believe it was more than 70% of our highest priority. And would that be something that we could explore as well?
Absolutely. I think, in fact, both the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs have asked me to make sure that we find a way to capture the information that we're getting from these meetings, and then make sure that we are capturing any comments from the greater community, that the people that couldn't participate this morning. So I will be working even early next week on trying to find a way for people to be able to submit comments, questions, take surveys on this very important topic. So yeah, thank you for that. I think that is their intention. I think it's really important to them.
Mr. Nemo, do you have any further questions?
No, ma'am. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
City Clerk Kelly?
Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre and Councilmember Spriggs.
One moment, please. Moment, please. Moment of privilege, please. People on the chat are now pointing fingers because of public comment and taking issue with people such as myself and Kevin speaking out about hate speech. And the people in this group, some people in this group are going to come after us because of our comments in a public setting. And I just want to say to our city council, I will not stand for anyone threatening me, Kevin, my neighbor, anyone in this community. I will call the police as fast as I can, and that includes you, Marcus Boyd.
Ma'am, that is very inappropriate, and you know it. You know I am political, and I stay political. I am one of the only people you know that has ever put a ballot initiative on the ballot in Imperial Beach. When I say that you and I have an issue, that would be political. You sit on the school board, and you have a problem with the term Black Lives Matter. That is a problem that you and I will be having going forward. Thank you.
I'm sorry, this is not the.
If I may, we want to give everyone who has taken the time to participate in this meeting and to submit comments to have the opportunity to have those read out if they haven't had an opportunity to speak yet, or have their comments read. So please, City Clerk Kelly, if we can continue with the remaining written comments, because we're past 11 and we want to make sure that we respect everyone's time.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre. City Manager Hall has 10 comments that he will read.
The first comment is from Michael Carey. Thank you to all involved in this committee and this meeting. My understanding from the council meeting where this was voted on is that some money, $5,000 to $10,000, will be available for consultant help with this process. I feel that a good consultant is important, especially in a task as far-reaching and complex as one undertaken by this committee. So my recommendation is that the money be well spent for consultant help. One possibility for consultant that I would like to see considered is Dr. Keisha Clark, who is an expert in diversity, cultural competence, and inclusive equity. Dr. Clark works for the Human Resources for the county and has been involved in local IB events through the IB People's Alliance. She would be a great addition to our efforts in this very important process. Thank you. The next comment is from Angela Zagami. Good morning, and thank you for having this important meeting. A few weeks ago, a video was taken in the city of San Diego that went viral. Law enforcement apprehended someone and put them in an unmarked vehicle, taking them to who knows where and for how long, all because they exercised their legal right to protest an assembly. Imperial Beach, as we know, is different from the city of San Diego. However, there is nothing stopping the county sheriff's office from doing something similar here if they saw fit. In San Diego County, law enforcement takes up 1/3 of the county budget. We need some type of law enforcement in Imperial Beach, but some of these funds could be redirected to help our homeless population, environmental protection, helping local businesses, our library, and much more. More law enforcement doesn't necessarily mean more safety, but it can mean our personal freedoms and liberties can be infringed. Thank you. Next comment is from William Nemo. The financial solvency of the city must be the highest priority of any city council. Due to your diligence is to eliminate the redundancies, identify waste, and as a last resort, cut non-essential services. The city of Imperial Beach has had issues with financial solvency for quite some time. From struggling to bring enough TOT and sales tax to fill the coffers, to depending on other agencies to pay for services like lifeguards. It is clear that there is a real need to reevaluate the way we do business. For the sake of the taxpayer, we must do better. It's easy to see that the sheriff's contract is a massive portion of our budget. If we can remember, the cost of law enforcement to the city is always high, especially in times when we had our own IBPD. Recruitment and training, equipment and cars, insurance and benefits, these things cost money, a lot of money. But there is a reason that year after year, contract after contract, the city of Imperial Beach has chosen San Diego Sheriff's Department. They provide a superior service and to the tune of their budget more than what we pay for. I have spoken with members of our IB station from the highest rank to the lowest. We get more than what we pay for, and it's still not enough. We have 2 deputies per shift patrolling our city. A city of 27,000 people dependent on 2 heroes to keep the peace. That's not enough. To convene a special meeting with the intent to reduce law enforcement budget by nearly, per Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre's suggestion at the last meeting, the same amount as we willingly wasted on political lobbying firm to go across the border and produce nothing in return is hypocritical and wrong. Let us be honest with the way we do business and in turn, be honest with the people of Imperial Beach. Let's cut the cost on luxury spending before we cut the cost on the people's well-being. Thank you for your time and consideration. The next comment is from Cheryl Quinones, lifelong community member. I support fully funding our sheriffs. However, reviewing the sheriff's contract in detail is something that I feel should be transparent, community interest-based, and published as best as legally possible. That being said, I think a law enforcement review ad hoc committee comprised of city representatives and interested community members at this time would be a good practice moving forward and appropriate when we look at our city budget and the needs of our community as outlined in our community survey. I believe law enforcement review ad hoc committee can draw up guidelines that truly reflect upon the values of our community, driven by our city mission statement in the process of negotiations is critical with the sheriff union at the onset. These negotiations should begin with our city values and guidelines drawn up by law enforcement review ad hoc committee, working with the best interest of our community and our city values first and foremost at the table when we negotiate with the sheriff's union every time. Therefore, I nominate community leader Will Nemo to serve on the law enforcement review ad hoc committee. Thank you for your time. Warren Gaw, we need to reinvent the idea of public safety and law enforcement. The Sheriff's Department has proven itself to be incapable of responding appropriately to public concern as it relates to their excessive use of force and racial discrimination. A successful organization should actively ask for community feedback, implement change, measure outcomes, and then share that information transparently. The Sheriff's Department of the Greater San Diego area have not demonstrated significant change despite years of racial justice activists calling on them to change. It is very difficult for me to gauge their true capacity to measure their own performance because of their lack of transparency. Based on what I can see, the Sheriff's Department doesn't seem to make significant changes. Either they don't want to or they simply can't. Let's create a new public safety force. We can have peace officers respond to drug crimes, DV cases, home invasions, and traffic accidents. We can create a safety force that is more effective and more transparent. They will be held accountable for their performance and outcomes in promoting public safety. They will be dynamic and able to evolve with the changing needs of our town. Most importantly, they will not use violence. They will not engage in harassment in any form. They will be activists for racial justice. I believe in this ad hoc committee. Let's be bold leaders for the city and this nation. Let's show the world how Imperial Beach can thrive when we dare to do something different. I know it won't be easy, but there are a lot of motivated people and organizations who would love to contribute their expertise to help us make this happen. Beatrice Blevins is an Imperial Beach resident. Relocating funds towards park, rec, after-school activities, tutoring, and mentoring is instrumental in deterring crime and creating productive adults. By providing these opportunities for our community youth, we are evening out the playing field as they gain skills and more positive outlook with life, with opportunity, like our neighboring youth and affluent communities. Leaders, parents, community members, we must provide safe, structured programs that youth feel supervised, with positive activities and mentoring. Studies on the active and structured recreation and after-school programs focused on youth have shown positive outcomes, such as higher esteem, greater academic achievement, and lower incidence of delinquency. Sheriffs need the following. They need to represent the community, not scare, bully, or profile. They need to have positive presence in our community. They need high-level training on diversity, mental illness, and work on public servant level versus authoritarian. Questions: what are the proportions of crimes being reported, violent crimes versus nonviolent crimes? What are the age demographics? When is there an opportunity to give feedback on how the sheriff's contract should look? Deter crime, have a more inclusive and diverse sheriff's department. We all need to be active participants. Respectful. Allison Hoover. It has come to my attention that PERT can only assist persons who cannot clothe, feed, or house themselves. These individuals have to be seen as a grave danger to themselves or others. That being said, there are many forms of mental health and social services that are not addressed under the PERT umbrella. Sheriffs currently are required one eight-hour class to help them identify when to contact PERT. PERT offers a 3-day class that aids officers in identifying other forms of mental health, mental well-being, especially those with developmental disabilities, identifying victims of abuse, PTSD, and self-harm. The 3-day class offers officers in their toolkit for dealing with the well-being of the public. This being said, the 3 days training is free. We should require all officers who work for the Imperial Beach substation to have taken this class prior to their start of duty. Thank you. Paul Lasso writes, hello, my name is Paul Lasso. I would like to know what the criteria the city is using for choosing the consultant and the ad hoc committee. What qualifications and or experience should the consultant have? Is there a list of potential hires? Is the list of potential hires public? Sorry about that. How can we ensure that the consultant appreciates the complicated relationships that marginalized groups have with the law enforcement? How can we ensure that the consultant is familiar with evidence-based strategies for crime prevention that does not involve traditional law enforcement? For example, drug use as a public health issue rather than a policing issue. I'd like to advocate for the consultant to be a person of color. One such candidate could be Dr. Keisha Clark, who works for the county staff development specialist, but also has a master's degree in criminal justice and has worked in advocacy for marginal groups disproportionately affected by criminal justice system. Even if the city doesn't hire Dr. Clark for the role, it is imperative that the city choose someone who brings a different perspective outside of traditional law enforcement. Here's a link to her bio from a county event. Thank you for your time. Two more. Charlotte West. Hello, my name is Charlotte West. I'm writing to advocate for complete transparency in our sheriff's budget and policing practices. As taxpayers, we're entitled to see the details, including how much is each officer paid in overtime and what are the policies regarding overtime. Is overtime discouraged as it is in other professions, or are officers incentivized to stay on the clock? How much were law enforcement officers paid in overtime this last year? What is the conviction rate for crimes in Imperial Beach? If conviction rates are low, does this indicate poor quality of investigative work and or higher incidence of police harassment? Jennifer and William Nesbitt. Hello, I am Jennifer Nesbitt. I am so thrilled to be part of this group and to have a chance to look at how to best utilize our law enforcement resources to make our city the best it can be. A couple questions I have. Is the current contract for law enforcement in Imperial Beach, how many officers, how many hours of coverage per day / per week? From what I understand, There used to be a specific IBPD. What was the reason we switched from a city department to a county contract? What other enforcement services does IB provide? Is there a code enforcement officer, CSO, community service officer, or animal control? Are there other ways citizens are able to participate in crime prevention in the city of Imperial Beach, neighborhood watch, citizen patrol, or other training opportunities? Look forward to hearing the view of others on Saturday. Sincerely. And Mayor Pro Tem, that is the end of the written comments.
Great, thank you. City Clerk Kelly, I don't know if there was anybody else that hadn't had the opportunity to speak that had their hand raised.
Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre, the people I see with their hands raised either provided verbal comment or written comment in the past.
Okay, so we are about 11:20. We have some time to continue to hear those comments. So if we can go ahead and receive those.
Okay, the first person up is Gary Brown.
Just real quick, once the city signs a contract with the sheriff, can the level of services be altered for that contract period? For example, well, gosh, could we increase the number of deputies? Could we decrease the number of deputies? Could we contract for a motorcycle officer rather than a patrol car type of service after a contract is signed?
Let City Manager Hall answer that, because I know that he has negotiated those clauses in the past.
Yes, that's a good question. Each year, each fiscal year, by May 1, we can change the makeup of our sheriff's department. So as Gary mentioned, we could have less patrol cars and we could have officers on motorcycles, for example. They're more expensive, actually, surprisingly, than patrol officers in a car. But yes, what happens is the county gives us a menu of personnel, and we can choose the personnel off of that menu. Patrol officers, detectives, traffic officers, CSOs. So there's a menu, and the costs to Imperial Beach are the same costs as they are in the other 9 contract cities. So it doesn't cost Imperial Beach any more or any less to have a sheriff deputy. It is calculated by the county, and then we choose how many officers we want to have in our substation.
The next person up is Leonard Miranda. Mr. Miranda?
Yeah, hi, I'm still here. You know, so much has come up and I'm reading the comments and it's kind of hard to focus on the comments and see how easily this thing could get derailed. So listen, I'm going to follow up with an email to the city manager or a text, and then I'll go ahead and pull out from the continued conversation at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miranda. Next up is Richard Pilgrim. Mr. Pilgrim? Mr. Pilgrim? Okay, I will move to the next person, Angela Zagamai. Angela?
Hello, yes, hi, sorry. I guess everybody covered it. I just wanted to say thank you for having this meeting. I think we're one of the only cities in San Diego County that's even talking about altering our sheriff's budget and our law enforcement budget. I'm getting a lot of worthwhile information. So yeah, I think what I wanted to say was already covered. So I guess I'm just commenting to say thank you for having this meeting.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm didn't get unmuted earlier.
Okay, go ahead and proceed, Mr. Pilgrim.
Okay, very quickly. I think we have to know that any change in the role of the sheriffs in policing is going to require bringing in other human resources, homeless counseling, domestic dispute assistance, etc., which will require spending money, just a different place. These will be continuing costs, not just lumped under sheriff's contract. Can we come to some understanding about revenue so that we can give any consultant some guidance regarding resources available for any recommendations they might make? That's it for my comment. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre, we have no further raised hands.
Thank you, City Clerk Kelly. I'm sorry, go ahead, Councilmember Spriggs.
Yeah, I think the last comment is very informative by longtime resident Dick Pilgrim, who's also worked with the Sheriff's Department as a CSO, I believe. It
No,
is true.
Just a volunteer, didn't work for it.
As a volunteer. But I think the point being that whatever alternative services there are to meet needs not best addressed by sworn deputies are going to have costs, and we will need to be able to fund those costs if we want to shift to a different way of providing services for non-violent or non-threatening situations in the community, maybe in some homeless situations or others. That's something that we're going to be exploring, is looking exactly at what are the calls to dispatch and arranging those calls in some organized way, which is what one of the things we want the consultant to be able to do, in terms of where there is an opportunity for non-deputy type response to those calls. Then we have to look at, is it within the city's capability, not just financial, but our mandate, our departmental structure, our oversight structure, et cetera, to provide those services. For example, the county provides most health and social services to cities that don't have their own departments. Would we be able to contract with the county to fill those gaps in Imperial Beach? So there are some real implications, I think, and many more than that are raised by that last question. I think we're going to be way down the road by the end of this process, way beyond where we are right now, in understanding what these trade-offs are, what the costs are, and what's realistic about providing services to meet needs that the sheriffs are not the best place to go to for meeting those needs. I was on a call with other elected officials just a week ago with Sheriff Gore and many of his senior staff to talk about the question of use of force and other issues. Mayor Dedina was on there as well, on that call as well. Interestingly, I was the one who raised some of the sort of use of force kinds of questions, and he was the one who raised the financial sustainability questions. But one of the interesting things that Sheriff Gore said is that he also would like to see a broader social services supportive environment where his deputies wouldn't have to respond to calls that could be better responded to by others. And he would like to see a situation where, for example, the county jail doesn't include a lot of people who are, really in need of psychological and other social services, but there's no such services or insufficient such services available. And he made the broad comment, and I happen to agree with it. And this is just for us to think about as background. that our American society has not allocated resources to help the less fortunate and particularly troubled people, homeless, psychological situations, um, even people who are on substance abuse victims, etc. We don't have, as a society, we have not allocated the resources to deal with these issues. And it's a major resource allocation issue. But resources get allocated based on your philosophy as a society, your values as a society. That's really the point that he was getting at. We're a society that tends to go with law enforcement first and social safety net kinds of protections and services second or third or fourth or fifth. And we're going to run into this lack of resources, human and financial, and oversight resources when it comes to finding alternative services that could help Imperial Beach residents rather than sheriff services in all of these different kinds of situations. A large city like San Diego, or even cities that aren't quite as large, that has their own social services department, has more options than a tiny little community like ours. And where you've seen, those of you who've been on this, in this meeting from the very beginning, you saw City Manager Hall's presentation of our budget and the kinds of departments that we have. We are really basically, we're at the basic level, city government 101, in terms of the kinds of services that we're able to provide in our community, for our small population, with our small resources. So when we start looking at these alternative services that would be preferred, the question is going to be, how are we going to procure them? How are we going to provide them? Where are they going to come from? What's the professional oversight structure for those services? How can they be called immediately on scene when needed versus sheriff deputies, etc. These are going to be complicated questions, and they're going to be tougher for us to find effective, affordable solutions in Imperial Beach than in a larger city situation. So I think the question that was raised has lots of very deep implications. I just wanted to touch on them a little bit, just from my knowledge of the city and other situations, and the very, very interesting dialogue between elected officials and the sheriff's department that took place about a week ago. I think that was very revealing on the part of the sheriff himself about his own feelings of regarding the lack of alternatives to the use of sheriff deputies to handle all kinds of situations where he admits that other services would be better, but they're just not there. So we've got a big task in front of us, and I really am glad we've got so many interested and really, obviously from the comments, smart and insightful people working with the City Council Committee on this.
So Jackie is just checking to see if we have any other hands raised, and it doesn't look like we do. There's a lot of chat, but some of the chat has been internal amongst the chatters and probably not our business, but she's trying to work through that. But she does have one other question that just came in.
We do have a question or a raised hand from Leonard Miranda.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just following up on Councilmember Spriggs' comments, one of the things that the Sheriff's Department, I don't know if they have it. I know they did have it in one of the adjacent communities in Chula Vista. But as I've been reading the comments, there are some people who are in very distinct camps as far as their perception of law enforcement. And I think that's starting to get flushed out here. And one of the things Chula Vista had was a Citizens Academy. And I think that gives you a real good perspective from law enforcement, what they need to deal with. I'm not sure if the Sheriff's Department puts that on, but it's also kind of a bridge building type of thing so that people have a good understanding of what it is that they contend with and some of the challenges that occur over time. So I don't know if they have that, but maybe for some of the folks that are really maybe anti-police for whatever reason, from their realities of their lives and things like that, that may be a helpful thing to pursue. Thank you.
Mr. Miranda, in Chula Vista, that would be put on by their own police department. But the Sheriff's Department has various exercises and so on that help people, the average citizen, familiarize themselves with what the sheriff's experiences. So that there are things available like that from the Sheriff's Department.
Very good, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre and Councilmember Spriggs, we have a caller, number 773. You may speak.
Yeah, hi. Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Carey?
Yeah, thank you. This is Michael Carey. I wanted to say two things. One, I wanted to thank everyone. I wanted to thank the council, the city for creating this opportunity, the staff for working on it. I've been involved for more than 25 years in local politics, and what you're creating here is one of the best mechanisms for communication within the community, maybe made possible by the whole virus situation. So I, again, want to thank you very much for what you're doing. I'm very impressed by it and very hopeful. And I would like to encourage, you were talking about getting more feedback from the community. I would like to encourage those who are on this call to go out to our neighbors and encourage them to participate in this process. Sounds like we're going to have a number of meetings coming up when that's established. And so there's nothing like hearing from someone that was involved in the call saying it was worthwhile and please get involved in it. So that's kind of my main point is go out into the community, those of us who are involved in this, and get more of the community involved in it still. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. That's an excellent comment. We encourage everyone to reach out to your neighbors, your friends, other residents in Imperial Beach. Encourage them to participate in this process because, again, we want it to be a very community-driven process, and that's why we're having precisely this series of meetings. So great comment. Thank you, Mr. Carey.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, at least for now, that it seems to be all the hands raised, and again, the chat comments are a lot of them between individuals, and so we will stay out of that. But we have a couple other items on the agenda. Would you like us to move on, and then if there's time, we can have a few more comments? Or
yes, please. I was just going to suggest that, so please go ahead and do that.
So the other couple of things that we need to talk about are the meeting schedule, when we would like to meet again. And I know that I need to end my share screen to maybe accomplish what Councilman Spriggs is hoping to, and we'd have to have everyone turn on their video and kind of vote. And then we also wanted to talk a little bit about, oh gosh, I've lost it now. I think the meeting schedule is the next item that's on the agenda. I apologize. I can't see anything because I'm the only person that can't see anything but my screen. So
you could go and disable the sharing screen if that helps.
If you guys are done with this, this is great. Oh, this is nice to actually see people. This is great. So, so the biggest thing that we need to do is we talked about the need to have the other 4 meetings, and we need to do them essentially about every other week. in order for us to finish up and have at least the report ready for the city council by September 16th. So Councilman Spriggs, you had some ideas about maybe polling people and finding out the best times and places to have those meetings. We won't have a perfect time for everyone, but at least maybe we can encourage, as much participation as possible.
Yeah, Andy, I think that could be most effective if we start with a default suggested by, it may have been Dick Pilgrim, that we just meet on same time on Saturday, 2 weeks from now, et cetera, and just schedule the meetings for 9 to 12 or 9 to whenever we get done. If it's earlier, fine. If we have to go later, fine. The object is to really have accomplished the goals of each session so we can move forward progressively towards the draft report and the final report. So we've got 4 more sessions planned, 2 more on substantive issues, use of force, one week, and then alternatives for providing services the following week, and then a draft report, not the following week, but the next meeting. Then a draft report that we want to prepare in between for everybody to look at for our penultimate meeting, and then a final report for that'll go to the council that we'll all review a few days before the council meeting. So I would propose that we just set as a default Saturday mornings, spaced so that we have maybe 2 weeks in between them or whatever the calendar dictates going forward to that final point. And we just take a vote on whether that works. And because if that works for the majority of the people, at least on this call, who are obviously really committed to this process, or they wouldn't have been here this long, then I think we're good. If it doesn't work, then we've got to figure out some other time, and then we'd have to go to maybe would a weekday be better, and then which weekday, and so we're going to be in a bit of a stew if we have to go to that process. Maybe instead, if Saturdays don't work, maybe there's going to be a process run by the city to poll everybody to see what a better day is, and then work it out that way rather than try to do it by Zoom. So that would be my suggestion. We just try to see by show of hands or whatever whether Saturdays are okay.
We need everyone to turn on their cameras to vote.
It's okay.
You have to turn their cameras on.
Yeah, some folks haven't turned their cameras on.
It says the host is disabled.
I don't have a camera, but my hand's raised.
There we go.
Can I just say yes? Might make it easier and safer for everybody else. I haven't shaved in a month.
It's so nice to see everyone's faces.
Yes, it says
Right.
that my video is disabled by the host, but yes, everything's
Yes,
good.
mine's disabled by the host. But when we can see yours.
Seems like the majority.
Agree.
Does look like the
It's
majority.
No, it still says disabled, but Saturday's fine.
Thumbs up.
Great.
Oh.
And the time works for everyone, 9 to 12. Is that a good time? Not too early,
Might
not
as
too
well.
late?
Yeah.
Great. Cool.
That's
Yep.
good.
That is any time. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we have our schedule. It's a great first step.
All right.
So the last thing on the agenda was a wrap up by first Councilmember Spriggs, and then Mayor Pro Tem McGarry was going to take us home.
Okay, I'll be very brief, because I've made a lot of lengthy comments already. So I'm very, very grateful to every single one of you for participating. This is really important. We are going to get a product out of this. And so I think we all can feel that we're contributing to something concrete and specific. We are going to get a product. We may not all be overjoyed with every aspect of the product, but we are going to have a report to the city council. It may be a clean final draft because there's some blanks, but you know, come hell or high water, we're going to have a report to the city council for that mid-September meeting, and of some kind. And so I'm really grateful. I think when we have a deliverable, we all work better in putting it together and knowing that we're going to have something we can see at the end of the process. So thank you all very much for participating, and I look forward to seeing all of you and maybe more members of the community at our next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Spriggs. I also want to thank everybody for participating today. Your voices are super important to us and to this process. Thank you for your commitment to our city. And as you heard, there's going to be many different opinions, right? But I believe that we can work through this together. And I'm hearing Jackie says there's 2 comments.
Oh, sorry.
It's fine if there are. It's fine. I mean, that's why
She's
we're here.
only whispering it.
I heard her.
I apologize. I was whispering to the city manager. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Did you want to go ahead and read them before we conclude?
They're actually raised hands.
Okay.
The first one is Beatriz Blevins. Go ahead, Beatriz.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Actually, I was raising my hand because you said raise your hand earlier. However, I don't believe things are a coincidence. I'd like to just say thank you again for this opportunity. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I think that, you know, we all have different ideas. However, we have to have these uncomfortable conversations in order to get something accomplished. With that being said, I will not pretend that I am an expert on, you know, politics or anything like that. However, I will do my best to provide my experiences, my input, and try to get, you know, credible sources in order to work on getting something for our youth. Because in the end, it's our youth that are looking to us. So, you know, arguments, disagreements, we can do them like adults because these are the future adults. And we want to give them an opportunity to have sources, have good policing, have parks and recs, maybe other after-school programs. I think we're innovative, we are creative, and as a community of Imperial Beach, I believe in us. I feel that if we put our heads together, whether we agree or not, we can come up with, you know, some sort of a great outcome that will benefit our community. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Mayor Pro Tem McGarry, there's one more raised hand. I believe it's Michael Carey, and he may be raising his hand to vote, but I will unmute him. Mr. Carey?
Well, thank you for unmuting me. No, I got my comments in. It was the appreciation for the thing, and yeah, I was trying to raise my hand. I appreciate you allowing those of us who have difficulties with the technology, dinosaurs as my grandkids call me, to participate by phone if the other part doesn't work. So anyway, thank you all again very much for what you've done.
Okay, and that is it, Madam Pro Tem.
Great. Thank you, City Clerk Kelly. I also want to thank staff for spending their Saturday with us as well and for all of their hard work around this. I'll just remind everyone again, someone mentioned it earlier, to encourage your neighbors, your friends to participate in this process. I also want to urge everybody to send in their suggestions for the consultant. Some great suggestions have already been made because that's one of the very next steps that we're going to have to take in a very speedy way. So again, thank you. The next meeting, we've set the schedule for it. We're going to dive deep into some data analysis and the review of use of force policies and practices in Imperial Beach. so that in the end we can have a very well-rounded and community-informed product to present at the September council meeting. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I look forward to working with all of you over the next coming weeks. It's going to be it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of good work, but we can get it done, all of us together. So,
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, before people sign off, I think the city clerk has a comment.
Members of the public, please submit your comments to this particular email address, comments@imperialbeachca.gov. Okay, and be sure to share your contact information so we can compile a list. Thank you.
all right, well, enjoy everyone your Saturday. Happy Saturday. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Have a
Take
good
care,
one.
everyone. Thank you.